So yesterday, Boris Johnson went to Kiev and pledged 120 armoured vehicles, anti-ship missile systems and more economic aid. Russia continues to regroup its forces for an expected push on Donbass in the southeast of Ukraine. Allegations of war crimes mount, with attacks on civilians in the towns and villages, particularly around Kiev, as those Russian forces withdraw. The Sunday Times says that 80 suspects are already in the frame for war crimes, and The Observer says the dossier of evidence on Bucha is building. The siege of Mariupol continues. Well, 4 days ago saw the 30th anniversary of the start of another infamous siege, that of Sarajevo. The echoes of what happened in the former Yugoslavia, in Ukraine, are striking. One state denying the right of another to even exist, war crimes, rogue or just plain evil military commanders, and a manic leader. Well, two friends of mine were deeply involved in that war, and I wondered if they felt there were lessons to learn from that conflict and from what they saw in Bosnia as we examine and try and understand Ukraine. So I took a deep breath and I invited them both on, and both agreed. And they are here. My dear friend from the ITN days, Paul Davis, reported throughout the siege of Sarajevo, uncovered evidence of war crimes, gave evidence in The Hague against Slobodan Milosevic, and was made an honorary citizen of Dubrovnik in recognition of his reporting. The other is Beckenham MP Bob Stewart, DSO, who was the first British commander of United Nations forces in Bosnia. Like Paul, he too discovered massacres. Actually, they worked together there. And it included Amici, in which 103 people had been killed. They saw horrors together all those years ago. And I'm absolutely delighted that, as you can see, both are sitting with me now here in the studio. Thanks, guys. I want to start with you putting the military cap back on for a moment. As we said in the news bulletin and in that introduction, more armoured vehicles, coast-to-ship missile systems, and a lot more money. Have we now done as a country enough to make sure that Ukraine can win this militarily?
We'd like to do more, Alistair. Frankly, the government would like to do more, but it can't, because it's constrained by the fact that if we do too much, we could well escalate the whole process into a European world war. So we're doing everything we can to support the Ukrainians, in a way, fighting by proxy for the rest of us. God bless them for that.
Yeah.
So we're
and I only interrupt because obviously you know what you're talking about, but you were also a former military attaché in NATO, so you know the delicate balance here.
It's a hugely delicate balance. Just you've got to think of Romania, Hungary, and some of the nations. For NATO to act, there's got to be unanimity. That's 30 nations, and there isn't unanimity to do very much, actually, at the moment.
But many of those countries that you and I reported on when we covered the fall of the Berlin Wall and then subsequently the Velvet Revolution, you went on to Romania and all sorts of places and saw some pretty dreadful stuff there. You know very well that those countries are champing at the bit, former Warsaw Pact countries, to help Ukraine. Poland wanted to lend aircraft. Czechoslovakia is giving tanks.
They're not being allowed to. And I think that's probably one of the decisive moments has been Biden saying, no, you're not giving them jets, because if you do, that's an excuse to expand this thing. I mean, that's the whole dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the razor blade they're all sitting on. Everybody wants to do more, and I can just imagine people like Bob, people who today's commanders thinking what they could do, what they would like to do.
Well, they could roll it up very quickly.
Sure.
But they can't.
No. Because if they did, so, we all become a target.
Well, I mean, very quickly. I mean, I think about 2 hours before cruise missiles above London, if the Russians decided that NATO was taking them on. That could happen. And so that is very much in the mind of all politicians right at the moment. And it is a very dangerous situation we're facing there. I mean, Boris Johnson's done the right thing to go to Kiev. He's done the right thing. That demonstrates to the people suffering there. Thank goodness Kiev has had some relaxation there. But the people in the Donbass are about to
see it.
Hell.
You once told me that you'd seen the Russian army at its very worst in what you described as your worst assignment in a career of 30, 40 years, which was Chechnya. And that was laying waste entire communities, firing on and killing refugees as they fled.
Well, I don't know what's worse, witnessing that, the horrors of it, the complete indiscriminate slaughter of people. I don't know what's worse, seeing that then and then seeing what's happening now. Because it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed.
Well, I tell you, it's actually a question I had later on, but you take me to it now, and it's a question to both of you, because you both testified in war crimes trials. You were cross-examined by Milosevic, who was at that stage conducting his own evidence.
Having sacked his lawyer.
Here's the question. Did you both believe that once Karadzic and Milosevic were banged up, that they were convicted of those war crimes, a Nuremberg of our age and our era, that would have drawn a line under it, that no country would do such dreadful things again?
Well, personally, the answer to that is in two phases. First phase, it's still there in Bosnia. The tensions are still there. If you don't believe me, watch what's going to happen in Republika Srpska in the next couple of months. And the second thing is, I never believed that it couldn't happen again somewhere else. I hoped it wouldn't, but, I remember one of my bandsmen, when Paul and I were together in Armici, I remember one of the bandsmen turning to me as he was spading up the remains of a civilian onto a stretcher, and he said, "I cannot believe this, sir. I believe this would happen in 1943, but not in 1993, and yet it's happening again."
Yes.
And you could see at that time that there could become a situation, the world would move on, where the Karadžićes, the Mladićes, and even the president, Slobodan Milosevic, they could become inconvenient to the people who later would be running those countries, and they'd be given up. You could see that as a possibility. It happened. Can you see Putin being given up by Russia? I mean, that's the issue. So can you
also,
see this stopping?
interestingly, people who are watching us on television will have been seeing that, but as you were both talking, we were running some pictures for my lovely friends who join us on radio of what's going on in Ukraine right now, and it's pretty brutal stuff. But I want to take you back to another assignment in terms of how these things may end. You were talking to me about your reporting of the Afghan engagement, and like the West, Russia finally withdrew, called it a day, couldn't see it through. And you said that there was a key lesson in that in terms of the governance of Russia, the old Soviet Union.
Well, absolutely. And it was internal regime change.
Yeah.
That was
Gorbachev.
That was the only way. Brezhnev took them in, and 10 years, and amazing similarities. 2 million people killed, civilian areas absolutely laid to waste, sexual crimes against women, but most of all, appalling slaughter of civilians, and the outside world taking sanctions. People didn't go to some Olympic Games and things like that. And it made very little difference. It took regime change. It took Gorbachev with a different view of how the world should be, not necessarily wanting to be a pariah anymore, and that's what it took. But this is a different Russia. This is a Russia that Putin has created. Opposition has been taken away. Critical media has been taken away. It's going to be very difficult.
Yeah. In your view, Bob, are these war crimes being done on the instruction of and orders of Putin, or by rogue generals, or even rogue soldiers?
I think actually they're soldiers out of control, primarily. They just haven't had the training. They are conscripts and they actually don't know how to behave. Clearly, war crimes are occurring. It is genocide in many ways. Both Paul and I have seen that. It looks like genocide. I'm not sure that it goes all the way back up to the top. But Putin is in real danger, he could well be replaced. That's how the Russians do it in the end. It's possible. Let's hope so.
And it was indeed it was the generals who tried to get rid of Gorbachev quite early on, and then Yeltsin.
But here's another option. What about what happened in 1917 to the Russian army? They mutinied. If things go really wrong, and if this new push down in the Donbass is actually repelled by the Ukrainian armed forces, and the Russian soldiers feel it's all appalling and dreadful, a mutiny, a refuse to soldier, could well be a possibility.
There are
be a possibility. What do you think?
There's reports of that already happening.
Yeah. And also intriguing, page 4 of the Sunday Telegraph today, pitiless commander takes a grip of Putin's faltering campaign. This is a guy who ordered the bombing of Syria and oversaw that. He's being put in, and it says it's General, I can't say it, Dvorovich, will deploy genocidal tactics used in Syria. So Putin's sending in an even more brutal guy to run this.
You know what? Let's just hope some of these Russian soldiers have humanity, because they are normal people, and actually they don't carry it out. Look, we've seen reports of Russian soldiers running down their commanders, that sort of thing. How many generals have been killed in this conflict so far?
Yeah.
I mean, what does that mean? It means they're having to go up front to try and steady the soldiers in the front line.
But getting back to Alistair's question, does Putin know? Is it rogues? If you have terrorising the civilian population as a strategy, and you've seen it in Afghanistan, you've seen it in Chechnya, you've seen it by proxy in Syria, that's something that Putin is aware of and can surely control. If he wants to stop it, he could stop it.
Yeah.
But it's just about the most effective weapon he's got, foul as it is.
We began talking about Bosnia and particularly Sarajevo and your joint connection there. As you said, unfinished business. You were telling me out in the coffee area you're going back for a very particular and rather personal reason.
To put up a plaque to Dobrila Kalaba, who is my interpreter at the massacre of Armici, who was, because people like Paul had shown her photograph, her thing, translating for me. She was shot 2 months later, and therefore she's a Bosnian Serb. She was a Bosnian Serb, aged 29, and we've managed, or I have asked, and it has been agreed, that a plaque be put on the Armici, near the Armici memorial to the 116, not 103, 116 were killed in Armici, and that is a wonderful thing. And I'm going back, and I'm delighted to say that about 39 others from my battle group are coming with me at their own expense for next Saturday.
Like the guy who said to you, "I can't believe I'm doing this."
Yeah. I don't know whether he'd be there.
Well, no, but
he was.
They are. We both know it because we're both. They are a remarkable breed of men and women.
It hasn't left them.
Yeah.
Some of the men in my battle group are still haunted by what they saw.
I have to tell you, Alistair, that Bob and I, we didn't know what we were walking into in Armici that day. And when we did realise what it was, and it was the slaughter of the menfolk above ground, and it was the herding of women and children into basements and setting fire to those basements, we walked into areas which actually were like a crematorium. We didn't realise it at first. We then did realise it. And the look on this man's face is something that will live with me. I mean, when we realised the penny dropped, good God, what have we just uncovered?
And remember the European Union
He was in tears.
He just burst into tears. He said, "I cannot believe this is happening."
These were hardened men.
I've asked both of you if you'll stay with us and come back at 1 o'clock when we're joined by the QC, who will talk a little bit more about the detail of war crimes and how it may unfold. But I want to end by asking you this. You're a former soldier, I've made that perfectly clear, with the Distinguished Service Order as well, and you're now a politician. You're one of the best journalists I know and have had the honour to work with for all of those decades. The Bosnian conflict ended in the Dayton Accords. A peace was struck under the chairmanship of the United States of America, and both sides had to give a little. Is there a give a little solution to Ukraine that remains honourable, Paul?
There's a give a little solution. Whether it's honourable or not, I don't know. It probably isn't honourable. It would require giving away territory and land that people have died for. But it might have to be the only way.
I think Paul's right. The trouble is it might have to be the only way, but the Ukrainian people say they've lost so much, they don't want to give up, lose those lives to actually still lose their country.
Yes.
They are incredibly
And as you said
patriotic.
earlier on, Zelensky was absolutely on the money when he said, if God forbid we fall, next it's Moldova, then it's Georgia, then it's the Baltic.
Well, it's the rest of us. It's a
Literally
domino.
the rest of us.
The dominoes go down, and frankly, that can't happen. And we must find a solution to this huge problem in Europe.
We'll talk more about war crimes at 1 o'clock. For the time being, extraordinary insights, and thank you both very much indeed for coming in and sharing those reflections. And it was very obvious to me, and I'm sure folk listening and watching, that some of those answers were not easy to give as memories flooded back. Paul and Bob, for now, thank you both very much indeed.